The last page has been turned in my most recent read. Well, that's not exactly true. I did start reading a book on the bus yesterday and then spent the entire day watching Only Murders in the Building Season 1 and part of Season 2 with my mum, so didn't look at another page. I guess that's something for today, though the weather is again kind of nice, but I see some cloud coming in, so reading it is. All that being said, here I am, no spoilers, as opinion-filled as ever and ready to roll. All of which means it's time for the latest episode of Being Bookish. This week I am working for a secret department for the government and living in a house with someone who likes to take apart toilets to see how plumbing works. In the Ministry of Time, the long-awaited debut from Kaliane Bradley. I'm your host, Ray, self-confessed bookworm, introvert, hermit, and long-term depression sufferer. Join me on my journey through my ever-growing to-be-read pile and enjoy the latest of my 100% spoiler-free book reviews. This book is a brand new addition to my shelves, and when I tell you that I had a tiny bit of drama actually getting hold of it, I am really not lying. There was a lot of chasing, a lot of trying to change the delivery date, and when it finally arrived, I was so frustrated by the whole process that it very nearly ended up going on my shelves to see the light of day at some point in the distant future. But when all is said and done, I read it, and now I'm going to talk about it. A boy meets a girl, the past meets the future, a finger meets a trigger, the beginning meets the end. England is forever. England must fall. In the near future, a disaffected civil servant is offered a lucrative job in a mysterious new government ministry gathering expats from across history to test the limits of time travel. Her role is to work as a bridge, living with and assisting and monitoring the expat known as 1847, Commander Graham Gore. As far as history is concerned, Commander Gore died on Sir John Franklin's doomed expedition to the Arctic, so he's a little disoriented to find himself alive and surrounded by outlandish concepts such as washing machine, Spotify, and the collapse of the British Empire. With an appetite for discovery and a 7-a-day cigarette habit, he soon adjusts, and during a long, sultry summer, he and his bridge move from awkwardness to genuine friendship to something more. But as the true shape of the project that brought them together begins to emerge, Gore and the bridge are forced to confront their past choices and imagined futures. Can love triumph over the structures and histories that have shaped them? And how do you defy history when history is living in your house? Wow. Just wow. That was a truly long blurb that honestly feels unnecessarily so. While I would normally go into a summary of the story right at this moment, it's impossible to go into any of it without spoiling the whole thing. If you're interested in reading it, I think that the blurb actually gives you a lot of information about the story, at least in my view, maybe a tiny bit too much, though as you read through the book for yourselves, you may find the blurb may actually come across as a tiny bit misleading. When I first heard about this book, I was honestly not sure. It has appeared on so many most anticipated lists since some point in 2023. There was no way to avoid mention of it. However, until I saw some Insta friends talking about it and mentioning how they'd read a preview and it was intriguing, I hadn't considered purchasing it. Falling under the weight of minimal peer pressure, because that's how I roll, I eventually ordered a copy at the beginning of May from the store named after a river. I will not apologise for this. May has been a very tight month for, I think, reasons connected to hair appointments, and then simply waited for it to arrive. Seriously, who would have thought getting hold of a copy of a new release would be quite so difficult? Anyway, ignoring my frustration, I finished the book I was reading when it arrived and then immediately picked The Ministry of Time up to see what all the fuss was about. However, before I actually get into what I thought about it, I am going to talk a little bit about other people's views, just to keep things nice and balanced, as ever. Having looked at the reviews currently available on Goodreads, I think this book may have drawn clear lines in the sand, those who loved it and those who didn't. Not sure there are that many people who were sitting on the "this is average" opinion fence. As always, I try really hard when it comes to sharing my personal view of a book to not be overly harsh when I didn't enjoy it that much, or too effusive when I loved it, and that really is my sole reason for sharing reviews from other people, just to keep things as balanced and fair as I can. If you've been attracted to the vibrant yet simple cover of The Ministry of Time on any book buying trips and have yet to pick up a copy, these reviews may help you to decide, or not. Horror Nerd gave this book 1 star, feeling they were misled by the impressive blurb. They said, "The blurb for this novel drew me in with the concepts of time travel and people plucked from points in history and secretive agents doing mysterious work. The actual novel is far from being a quirky exploration and commentary on how historical people would adjust to the modern world. Most of the book feels like an extremely dry exploration of office politics, with the concepts of time travel and avoiding apocalyptic futures pushed to the very background. The nameless female protagonist is not a fully realised character and feels just like a rough outline. Her romance with one of the time refugees feels awkward and never reads as real. The pace of the book feels slow and honestly could have been cut or edited down to just be a short novella. There is a lot of padding in the book and nothing much happens other than all the action and revelations about the ministry towards the end. Even the ending does not feel satisfying. The language in this book feels extremely awkward, full of stilted sentences like, "A great graphite pencil inscribed the diagonal journey of water on the air," and "It was another dank toothache of a day, barely qualifying in its chromatic dullness of grey." I think the author's style just didn't work for me. This novel had a great concept at its core, but it was not executed very well. As I was going through the 1 star reviews, I felt as though I was returning, albeit briefly, to my early days of talking about fantasy, when the reviews were extensive. Seriously, some were incredibly long, like an essay, containing GIFs and other images to express opinion, and then other reviews were very short, mere sentences stating DNF at 34%. I feel quite fortunate after my experience with Miss Austen Investigates that I was able to find any 1-star reviews where the reviewer finished the book and wrote a full review. That's if I'm being completely honest, because some of these reviews, yeah. On Goodreads, the overall rating for the book is 3.76, which I have to admit feels rather low for a book that was so widely anticipated that the BBC announced they had commissioned it from A24 back in February, a full 3 months before the wider audience had a chance to read it. I know that many books have lower or average scores, but this is meant to be so incredible that I was expecting it to have a score closer to the low 4s. Of course, romantic science fiction isn't a genre I tend to read that often, so maybe this is the norm. Right now, The Ministry of Time has only been out for a couple of weeks, so I'm not exactly ahead of the game with this review, but I am sort of keeping up with the Joneses, maybe? Over on Goodreads, which is always my first port of call when it comes to reviews, there are currently 6,903 ratings and 1,895 reviews for the book, which is good in comparison with books in some of the other genres I look at, but somewhat surprising for a book that was launched with so much fanfare. Where are all the reviews from the people who talked the book up? Have they moved on to something else without sharing their views, or are they on sites that I have yet to visit? Anyway, less speculating and more fact. Out of those 6,903 ratings, 62% of them, or 4,355 readers, felt it deserved a positive 4 or 5 stars. At the other end of the scale, because there has to be one, 10%, or 732, were less impressed and gave it a 1 or 2 star score. 26%, surprisingly, or 1,816 readers, felt The Ministry of Time to be neither good nor bad. They were the fence sitters. Something I admit I also find myself being when I'm not sure where I want to be on the reviewer scale. I know it likely sounds bizarre, but when I finished a book, I actually do quite enjoy reading the negative reviews. Quite often they're amusing as people put down in words the way they felt about a book that quite often I have myself rated a 4 or 5 star read. Granted, that is not always the case. Sometimes I will 100% agree with the points that they are making. On this occasion, the 1-star reviews were quite varied, and there was one particular review that had me chuckling for quite a while after I read it. I would have loved to share it, but it was much too long. I do try and find something that's amusing to share as a rule, because one long stream of constant negativity is far too much, and it's not entertaining. One thing I will say that I found annoying as I was going through the reviews was the stream of unfair accusations against the author, accusing her of plagiarizing a Spanish TV series which just happened to have the same title and a somewhat, if you squint, similar concept. So for all those who have seen the title of the book, read the blurb, and then seen the Spanish TV show, they are not the same. The concept of time travel, especially as a plot device, is not a new one, and this one does interpret it differently. That doesn't mean that Kaliane Bradley wasn't inspired by it. I don't know, if I'm being honest, but she did not directly steal it from the TV show and write it down. And thus endeth my brief TED Talk. Megu gave it 5 stars, having enjoyed the characters, the genre drifts, and the plot. She said, "An engaging and witty read with a perfect genre mashup. It's a time travel story without real time travel. Characters only deal with the aftermath of bringing someone across time, but we never really go with them to another era. That's because the focus of this book is on showing the corporate side of supervising the adjustment to a foreign world, rather than typical time-jumping related action and themes, although the story definitely delivers on the classical twists in this department. Apart from being simply fun, it also draws deeper parallels between the time expats and real-life migrants in the UK, and social commentary is precisely what earns my books an extra star. The romance starts happening only halfway through the book, and Gore is such a charming character. I really enjoyed it, even though I don't read love stories. In the beginning, I had some difficulties with the plot structure. The blurb describes the book as part workplace comedy, and it's on point here, as jumpy scenes really looked like shot changes from a TV show, ending abruptly and in random places. Also, there are many dialogues with no narration, which was an issue as I often lost track of who was speaking. But putting this aside, I adored the whole story. I have read quite a few books which have used time travel as a plot device. Most recently, the Aurora Cycle springs to mind, a series I greatly enjoyed and have recommended over and over to many friends since. This book definitely wasn't that. In this book, time and the concept of it is a core point. It is the reason our characters are where they are, and it is, moreover, who they are. I would go into that in more detail, but to do so would totally spoil quite a clever plot twist. It was interesting to see how Kaliane Bradley dealt with time travel and its effects on the wider populace. And as someone who has recently grown quite fond of the sci-fi genre as a whole, I couldn't exactly ignore a book that was being touted as outrageously brilliant and a new classic. Could I? Or should I have done? Anyway, now I've told you about other people's views, let's get down to it. Here are my thoughts on The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley, completely spoiler-free and, as ever, 100% honest. Did I like the book? I have pondered this particular question almost since the moment I closed the book and put it back on the shelf. Normally, when I read a book and finish it, my initial reaction is the one I trust. Did I like it? Yes or no? There. Simple. One side of me is there saying, it wasn't that bad, the characters were good, the story brought up some interesting points, and oh my god, that twist. Then the other side is loudly listing all these issues. So I guess I should start there with the issues and move backwards to explain the place I ended up. Strangely, I am going to start talking about my issues by mentioning my review of Miss Austen Investigates, because in many ways I think that the first problem I had actually stems, in a weird way, from that book. Okay, bear with me. I can sense you're starting to wonder if I'm going insane, but I promise I am not. Trust me. In Miss Austen Investigates, a real person, Jane Austen, is the central character. Though I enjoyed the book, many reviewers were curious as to why a real person, one we know existed, was used in a fictional world as she was. In The Ministry of Time, a man we know existed, of whom there is photographic evidence, is not only the focus of the book, but is also the main love interest of our unnamed narrator, and we'll get to that in a bit. Commander Graham Gore was a real man. The expedition he was on, during which he died, was a real event. So why pick him? There were multiple other unnamed men on that ship, whom Bradley could have used as a character in her novel. Now, Gore died without family. He wasn't married. He had no fiancé, no children. But does that mean he should be used as a love interest in a work of fiction? Okay, maybe I am taking offence at this for the wrong reasons, but when I tell you that the other characters pulled from their almost deaths are not real, they were not in history books, there are no photographs of them, you can see where I'm coming from, right? Why did Kaliane Bradley feel the need to use the name and photo for his images literally right there in the book of a person who really existed as this main character when the other characters were all a creation of her imagination? This was probably really the most significant issue I had with the book. She made him into some kind of sexual being, and I found the whole thing almost distasteful. At points, especially during a scene which I seriously do not want to talk about or even think about, he was the man of our narrator's fantasies. She was thinking about him as a potential lover. Given the nature of her other historical characters, why did he have to be a real person? The next issue I had was with the other characters. Only incredibly infrequently were they referred to by name. For the most part, they were spoken about using the year in history they were pulled from. Graham was, of course, Graham to our narrator, but he was 1847 to others. The others were 1916, 1645, 1793, and 1665. Given we were led to believe the nature of the experiment was to help these expats from history to adjust to the present time, some unnamed point in the future, I'd a guess, this method of referring to them feels dehumanizing, and as a reader it was quite jarring. Close to the beginning of the book, their character names are mentioned a few times, and I had to actually mark that page in the book and keep skipping back to it in order to know who was being talked about. I did not like this at all. The real elephant in the room when it comes to the Ministry of Time, though, is the narrator. Throughout, she remains unnamed. We know that she is British-Cambodian, like the author. We know that she is easily led. Her charge smokes, and though she had given up, she starts again with him. She doesn't hold back on voicing an opinion, and she just is. The central character has no name. She is referred to in the first person or by others as a bridge. Even Graham never calls her by a name. I know, there are books where the main character isn't given a name. Many here will cite Rebecca, where our poor central character is secondary in her own novel, but at least she has a title and a surname. In The Ministry of Time, we get nothing. I couldn't imagine myself in her shoes because she has a very specific life and very specific life experiences that I will never have as a white girl from the South Coast. But this lack of identifiers really didn't help me to sympathise with her or actually even get to like her character all that much. Oh, and this is such a little thing, but the "what is Guinness" question that Graham asks annoys me, because he was pulled from his expedition in 1847 and Guinness was around for almost 100 years before that point. A small thing, I know, but it bugged me. Wow. The more I think on it and the more I list the issues I had with the book, the less I like it. But it does have some redeeming points, and though I can't go into all of them because they really will spoil the ending, I am going to dip my toe in that pool just a bit for a moment. Despite there being a number of issues that I have already outlined, there is a conspiracy that runs beneath the main plot, which I hate to say is really all about Graham and our unnamed narrator. It's all about the corruption of the government and how the use of time travel could be manipulated, but only to change the future, not the past. There is even a point where our main character asks about whether they are planning to go back and kill baby Hitler, and she is told that this would not work. When I think about time travel and how it could work, I am always taken back to the 1986 film Peggy Sue Got Married with Nicolas Cage, where time travel is explained almost like a taco. I think that's the right film, tell me if I'm wrong. Or Back to the Future. Both of them have different and interesting theories on how time travel works and how it can affect the present and the future. There are many questions brought about by Biff stealing the almanac and becoming incredibly wealthy through something that potentially would have changed because of the changes he was making. But I digress. Bradley's own time travel choices make for an interesting story, and I would have liked to have learned more about that and less about the dull day-to-day that we get for over 150 pages at the start of this 340-page novel. Another plus in the book, as far as I'm concerned, is the clever plot twist that dominates nowhere near enough of the story. For the last 25 pages or so, there is nothing but action, and had this been spread across more of the story, it would have made for a far more exciting and entertaining read. If the twist had occurred earlier, then I feel the characters would have been more interesting than the dull hum they ended up being. Personally, I believe that the book was a wasted opportunity. It could have been so much more than it ended up being: more action, a central protagonist with individuality and identity, and maybe a name, and a love interest who was not a real person. I'm not sure why this gave me the ick, but it really did, and I felt disappointed by it. I was expecting so much more than I got because it was so hyped up by pretty much everyone, and it had so much potential to be incredible, but so many of the early pages were wasted with unnecessary narrative that gave nothing to the story or the reader. That all said, when I initially reviewed the book, I gave it 3 stars, and I feel that's being generous when I look at all the things I didn't like versus the things I did. Ultimately, though, this is my personal interpretation of a story that the majority of reviewers enjoyed. What surprised me most about the book? There is one scene that surprised me, mostly because while I had been warned about it I wasn't prepared for it to be as uncomfortable to read as it ended up being. Want to find out what that scene was? Join me on Thursday the 30th of May.
Can you dream of a world immune to cancer? Hello everyone, my name is Nick and I'm the host of the annual live stream for The Cure, where content creators and podcasters from around the world join me to raise money for the Cancer Research Institute and immunotherapy research, which is training the body's immune system to fight against all forms of cancer. Over the past 7 years, thanks to the power of indie podcasters and the indie podcasting community and listeners just like you listening to this right now, we have raised over $90,000. And as I record this now, the 8th annual live stream for The Cure is barreling down upon us really quickly in just about 2 weeks. So join us please from May 29th through June 1st for 48 hours of amazing content from people all over the world and help us fight for a world immune to cancer. I'll now return you to your regularly scheduled programming. Thank you so much. And together, we can make a difference.
If you're looking for something like this, or you loved this and want something else, then you'll love these. I can honestly say that I don't know of any books that are exactly like this. However, if you like the time travel idea, then I would 100% recommend The Aurora Cycle, which I've already mentioned, by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. Of course, if you want something a little bit funny and more on the fantasy side, then maybe The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England, though that wasn't actually one for me particularly. I did get a few chuckles out of it, and Brandon Sanderson is a good writer. Several people have compared this book to 2 others. The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. Having read it, I am not sure I see the similarities, though. The story of Claire and Henry is a beautiful one that I find makes me sob a few times with every read. The other book the Ministry of Time has been compared to is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, which was originally called Cross-Stitch in the UK. Having never read it, though my granny did try and persuade me many times, I can't make any judgments on that, though I am guessing they are placing Graham Gore in the role of Claire Beauchamp. What do you think? If you've read The Ministry of Time, do you think that it's in any way similar to Outlander or or to The Time Traveller's Wife? Join me in celebrating, seriously. I am actually on holiday this week, but I am going to be using that time to get some more books read and perhaps get more content put together for YouTube and the podcast. Both projects I am enjoying a great deal at the moment. I'm also getting ready to take part in my 3rd live stream for The Cure, and I would love it if you could check out some of the other really incredible podcasters who are taking part this year. It's year 8 for the event, and the organizer Nick puts his heart and soul and a lot of hours into making this event amazing, because it truly is very brilliant and important cause, especially for me, cancer research. I will post the link so you can donate if you want to, or join everyone from Wednesday the 29th of May to see many podcasters and content creators doing weird and wonderful things, all in the name of charity. Please don't forget, if you want to hear about new releases and other books I've read and keep up with my reviews, you can sign up for my newsletter on my website, beingbookish.co.uk. The April newsletter has gone out. The May newsletter was kind of postponed because the April newsletter was sent out so late, but I am putting together ideas to make the next one even better. Well, that's it for this week, and thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, why not share it with your friends and family, and please post a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the other podcatchers where you might listen. You can also follow me on Instagram as Being Bookish Pod, on TikTok as Being Bookish Reviews, and on X as Being_Bookish. And you can find newer episodes and some book-themed videos on YouTube, where I am at Being Bookish Pod. Or of course you can check out my website for the full written spoiler-free book reviews. Well, I have a few things left to do before I begin my proper full week of holiday, and yay! And I am looking forward to starting, or at least finishing, my current read. So until next time, this is me saying farewell.